Welcome to the battlefield of brains, where strategy meets chaos, and every move burns with intensity. Watch grandmasters clash, pieces fall, and legends rise. Hikaru thunders, his king pawn to e4, a classic spear into the center that opens lanes for queen and bishop. The battle drums begin. Amin answers with the Sicilian thrust c5, immediately contesting the d4 square and saying, "Let's make this sharp, no polite handshake." Knight from Gon hops to f3, eyeing d4 and g5, a nimble scout ready to pounce on any shaky black pawn. Black plays a6, a defensive brace that keeps the d5 square flexible and prepares a dark squared bishop's slow awakening. White shores up the center with d3, modest but pragmatic, the sort of move that says, "I'll build my fortress first." En minjaniter, a dikanis senikini, en ukseoja, a liptinage penny, an historie, and Black replies with 6, solidifying the pawn chain and preventing an immediate e5 push. The shield is up. White fianchettos with g3, preparing bg2 to control long diagonals, and whispering, "I want my bishop to bite." Black develops the bait knight to chicks, staking a claim on d4 and supporting potential queenside skirmishes. White places the bishop on g2, the fianchettoed archer, now watching the long diagonal with hungry eyes. Black plays n7, a flexible knight redeployment that keeps 5 and d5 ideas alive while avoiding early trades. White castles kingside, tucking the monarch behind a pawn wall and uniting the rooks for future thunder. Black plays g6, mirroring plans for a kingside fianchetto and promising a bishop ready to contest the long dark diagonal. Knight pawn at d2, a quiet redeployment that eyes e4 and c4 and keeps options open like a patient general. Black completes the fianchetto with bg7, bishop now, a slashing piece, aimed straight at White's kingside realm. White lifts the rook to a1, increasing pressure on the e-file and preparing a future f5 or tactical burst. Black castles too, both kings are safe-ish, rooks connected, the stage is set for middle game fireworks. White shoves f4, grabbing space on the queen side and preventing. Nay, enquis. Anna. b5 without a fight, subtle territorial gain, soldier by soldier. Black plays b6, fortifying queenside dark squares and freeing the seat bishop, a modest, sensible brace. White hurls a pawn forward with attitude. h4 threatens g5 and signals potential kingside aggression, a cheeky declaration of war. Black locks the pawn on a5, bluntly saying, "No g5 for you," but also fixing a target that could be attacked later. White plays c3, bolstering d4 control and giving the bone knight a base, building foundations before the smash. Black bursts into the center with d5, from z6, challenging a4 and opening lines, the first true central clash. White advances to a5, a thrust that chases pieces and creates tension. The pawn smells blood and charges into the fray. Black strikes with f6, trying to undermine the f5 pawn and pry open lines, a blunt counterpunch that loosens the kingside. White's e-pawn lunges to f6, capturing black's f-pawn, xf6, a sacrificial-looking grab that creates immediate material and airspace drama. Black's bishop from g7 slides to f6 and recaptures that pawn, bxf6, devouring white's forward pawn and centralizing the bishop fiercely. White repositions the knight from d2 to f1, regrouping for g3 e3 hops and hinting at a future knight jump to g3 or e3. Black's knight from a7 jumps to 5, eyeing d4 and h4, while challenging white's kingside posture, a lively outpost indeed. White pins and provokes with bg5, a bishop thrust that pokes the queenside and tempts tactical replies. Pressure applied. Black sidesteps the pin by moving the king to g7, tucking it behind pawns, but also momentarily walking into the bishop's glare. White's bishop from g5 captures on f6, bxf6, trading off black's centralized bishop and forcing a recapture. The air stinks of tactics. Black replies qsf6. Queen from date recaptures on f6, removing the bishop and placing the queen aggressively in the center. White slides the queen to e2, connecting rooks and eyeing potential battery entrances along e-file and diagonals. Black brings a rook to e8, likely from fate, reinforcing the e-file and preparing to contest white's central ambitions. White's knight from f3 leaps to g5, hoping to harass the queen in if7 h7 h7, a knight with itchy feet and sharp intentions. Black retreats the Sate bishop to 7, developing, guarding e6, and shoring up the long diagonal, pragmatic and tidy. White moves the knight from f1 to d2, rerouting and keeping pressure flexible. The pieces are dancing into battle formation. Black slides the 8 rook to date, rad8, occupying the d-file and preparing to contest central tensions and open files. White's knight from d2 hops to f3, bringing more firepower toward f5 and g5, a consolidation before ignition. Black thrusts e5, striking the center and opening lines, a pivotal pawn break that sharpens the position into full combat. White brings the a-rook to cone, mobilizing rooks and aiming at the semi-open c-file, queenside play simmering. Black shuffles re7, rook h7, perhaps seeking to redeploy or pile up on the 7th rank, defensive but flexible. White pushes c4, grabbing space and clashing with black's pawn on d5. The center churns into concrete tension. Black plays ncd4, the knight from chicks charges to d4, planting itself aggressively and threatening tactics against white's center. White captures that knight with nxt4, knight f3 con4, takes n6-4, liquidating a strong knight and forcing contact. Black answers, nxt4. The other knight, from 5, jumps to d4, capturing the knight that just captured. Equal exchange, smoke and mirrors. White retreats the queen to f1, reorganizing and eyeing kingside defenses while preparing potential central pawns to advance. Black plays b6, bishop to 7 chinks, repositioning the bishop to hit d5 and flex pressure on white's pawn chain. White captures with cxe5, pawn from c4 ed5, captures pawn on d5, opening files and ripping the center apart, material balanced, dynamics shifting. Black replies, bxt5, bishop from c6 recaptures on d5, grabbing the pawn back and centralizing a hostile piece. White's bishop from g2 swings to d5 and captures that bishop, bxt5, trading bishops and simplifying with style. Black responds, rxd5. Rook from date slides to d5, capturing the bishop on d5, exchanging active pieces and opening the d-file. White lifts re3, rook a3, a multi-purpose rook move that can swing to the king's side, reclaim the third rank, or double on the e-file. Black plays red-7, rook e7-7, placing the rook behind the d-pawn and shoring up d5 while keeping rooks coordinated. White swings rc3, rook e3 ket3, eyeing the third rank and secretly preparing to contest c-file infiltrations, rooks now prowling. Black plays a6, halting White's b5 ideas and giving the b-pawn a retreat square, slow, solid, slightly boring, but useful. White thrusts a5, sightseeing space on the queen's side and trying to cramp Black's b6 b5 ambitions. A pawn becomes a battering ram. Black answers b5, pawn b6 b5, counter-punching on the queen's side and opening lines. The board creaks as pawns clash. White centralizes na4, knight g5-4, heading for d6 or c5 squares, and increasing tactical motifs around Black's center. Black repositions the queen to a7, eyeing queenside infiltration and keeping an eye on the e-file, steadying the command post. White places the queen on cone, aligning with the c-file and subtly targeting Black's queenside weaknesses. Black pushes c4, pawn 5 e4, cramping White's queenside and trying to create a passed pawn, or at least a thorn. White steps the king to g2, a small but sensible step to tuck the monarch away and connect the rook for later. Black's knight leaps to b3, from d4 b3, hopping into enemy territory and threatening forks and invasion squares. White slides the queen to bone, keeping an eye on Atwu and b4 and preparing to watch the queenside fireworks. Black plays nx5. The knight from b3 captures the pawn on a5, nibbling White's queenside gains cleanly. White retreats the queen to a2, keeping pressure on the long diagonal and aiming at Black's newly exposed pawn structure. Black lashes out with b4, pawn b5 b4, kicking at c3 and trying to open files while creating a passed pawn prospect. White responds with dxc4, pawn from d3 goes to c4, capturing the pawn on c4, snatching back material and opening lanes. Black replies bxt3, pawn from b4 moves to c3, capturing White's rook on c3, a brutal rook snatch. White plays cxd5. The pawn from c4 advances to d5, capturing Black's rook on d5, reclaiming material and reviving central tension. Black pushes the passed pawn, c3 c2, racing the pawn towards promotion and turning the queenside into a powder keg. White drops rc3, rook from Konyak 3, trying to blockade and fight the invading pawn, desperate but industrious. Black slides the queen to b4, eyeing c3, and preparing to pick off loose pieces. The new queen smells prey. White hops nc5, knight e4 a5, planting on a strong outpost and aiming for d7 or b7, threatening to scramble black's plans. Black answers, qx8 c3, queen from b4 captures on c3, taking the rook that tried to block, big material swing for black. White recaptures bx c3, pawn from b2 goes to c3, and captures that queen on c3, trading queens for pawn structure mess and survival instinct. Black promotes with konewek. The passed pawn marches to Kon and becomes a queen, a demonic new piece suddenly appearing on the board. White replies nsd7. Knight from c5 jumps to d7, capturing the rook on z7, snatching material and keeping hopes alive. Black's freshly promoted queen swoops from Kon to c3, and captures the pawn on c3, reclaiming material and centralizing the newcomer. White strikes with nc5. The knight from 7 hops to a5, capturing black's pawn on f5, a tactical incursion that heaps pressure. Black answers, qc5. Queen from c3, captures that knight on a5, trading pieces and smoothing the way for black's advanced queen to boss the board. White's queen from a2 darts to a5 and captures the knight on a5, finally removing that marauding knight and claiming queenside spoil. Black's queen jumps to e4 with check, probing white's king and sniffing weaknesses. Tension spikes, the king is slightly exposed. White sidesteps kf1, king g2 and f1, moving toward safety and hoping to survive the onslaught with dignity. Black's queen counters with kone, a sneaky check that chases the king and dances on white's back rank like a predator. White answers ketu, stepping toward the center but also out of immediate checks, bold and slightly risky. Black repeats kefuri to keep white's king hopping. The queen's theatrical checks create psychological and practical pressure. White retreats gon, inching back into a slightly cramped shelter while keeping an eye on central pawns. Black returns to kone again, a taunting loop that wastes no time. The queen is enjoying a preview of dominance. White moves kd2, threading the king between pawns and pieces while hoping the queen's dance ends sooner than later. Black drops qg2, landing on a menacing square that eyes g-pawn and stitches together, threats across ranks and files. White's king slides to e3, a daring central stroll that seeks safety behind pieces and perhaps an endgame outpost. Black's queen quits the promenade to qf1, targeting the first rank and planning to harass white's loose structure. White replies with qc7, delivering a check and injecting counterplay on the queen side. Nice intermezzo. Black tucks the king further to h6, avoiding checks and hoping to keep the queen alive for more mischief. White pushes d6, a brave advance that crams a passed pawn into black's camp and demands immediate response. Black fires Kione, giving check and trying to disorient white's king and block the d-pawn's path. White answers, kd3, moving the king toward the center to support the advancing pawn, risky but resolute. Black regroups with qd1, repeating checks and probing for weaknesses in white's improvised shelter. White steps to k4, centralizing the king and daring black to finish the chase. The endgame scent grows. Black replies qa2ne with the queen, keeping the king dancing and maintaining tactical pressure like a metronome. White slips the king to d5, marching into the center with the d-pawn support, utterly theatrical and dangerously brave. Black captures on f2 with qsf2, grabbing material and nibbling at the king's shelter. White pushes d7, one square from promotion. The pawn now roars like a battering ram in the enemy's yard. Black counterchecks with qgt-onu, giving a tempo and seeking perpetual or escape routes for that powerful queen. White's king slides to c5, an aggressive stroll into the enemy camp to shepherd the d-pawn and support promotion. Black checks with qf2n, nudging the king and trying to derail the d-pawn's final march. White calmly marches kg6, ever closer to the queening square and utterly determined to shepherd the pawn home. Black answers qc2l, a last-ditch attempt to harass and maybe snag a perpetual. The tension is electric. White king sidesteps to b7, stepping onto the promotion runway and forcing black to make horrible choices. Black's queen replies qb3, checking and trying to cut off promotion paths while buying time. White slides check, fully committed to controlling the queening corridors and shepherding that pawn to glory. Black plays q6, a defensive centralizing square that hopes to block the pawn's route or create counterplay. White returns with chefuri, checking black's king and coordinating pieces for the final push. Black retreats cat7, slipping the king away from tactical pins and trying to live another day behind pawns. White's queen flies to fight, invading black's camp with menace and eyeing decisive tactical shots near the king. Black answers with a5, trying to create counterplay on the queen side and distract white's forces. White king moves to date, stepping onto the promotion escort route and keeping the d-pawn a heartbeat away. Black brings the queen to check6, trying to blockade, or at least delay, the impending promotion while juggling checks. White plays q7, a precise check that also sets up defensive geometry for the newly arriving queen. Black king slides back to h6, shivering under the onslaught but still alive for now. White steps k8, coordinating the king and queen to shepherd d-pawn and limit black's queen's antics. Black pushes f4, trying to create counter-threats and distract white from the promotion plan. hcu. White king to fate, marching with grim purpose and cutting off black's light squares near its king. Black plays qf3, offering checks to keep white busy and hoping for a miracle. White responds k8. The king slips into a safe square, while the d-pawn's fate looms large. Black checks with qd5, a desperate attempt to corral white's pieces and maybe repeat checks. White counterstrikes qf7, trading checks for control and sealing promotion routes, calm and clinical. Black counters with k8, a last spark of lightning, trying to yank the initiative back into the game. White sacrifices the queen, momentarily with qf2, force decisive simplifications, and clear the path for the pawn. Black captures back qes fight, accepting the regicide. White recaptures with kx fight. The king grabs the capturing queen, finishing the trade and marching into the pumping heart of the position. Black pushes a3, a last attempt to promote on the flank while the main battle rages near white's d-pawn. White promotes. Date Q. The pawn marches home, becomes a queen, and the board explodes. White wins beautifully, the battlefield drenched in decisive consequence. 1-0. And that's it. Black throws in the towel. The new white queen on date stands, like a conquering general, atop a mountain of fallen pieces. Bassem Amin's army is shattered. The brave pawns on the queen side couldn't promote in time. Hikaru Nakamura, calm yet blazing, has turned chaos into victory. The battlefield is silent now. Knights gone, bishops fallen, rooks perished. Only the lone king and his newborn queen remain to bask in triumph. The crowd roars. The clock ticks its final seconds, but it's meaningless. The war is over. White reigns, supreme.